So I think we'll get started for the sake of time, and so that we have enough time for discussions. First, I want to welcome you to the second to the last HathiTrust session for our very first ever Community Week. This session is titled Strengthening Diversity in the HathiTrust Digital Library. I'm Heather Walton, the Shared Print Program Officer for HathiTrust, and my preferred pronouns are she and her. And I am the facilitator for this event. A new slide, please, Fred. Before I turn it over to our presenters for this session and to do some housekeeping, I wanted to take a minute to remind everyone that Hottie Trusted events, like our member meeting and community week, adhere to our code of conduct, which can be found on our website, is posted on the slide in front of you now, and will be posted to chat shortly. Now, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters. So Wade, take it away.
Great, thanks, Heather. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for our session this afternoon. My name is Wade Wyckoff, and I'm an Associate University Librarian at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario. I have the privilege of serving as the chair of the HathiTrust Digital Collection Strategy Working Group. Next slide, Fred. So just a few housekeeping details before we get started. We want the session to be a conversation with you as HathiTrust members, and the working group has framed 2 discussion questions as conversation starters that we'll get to in just a moment. We encourage you to share your thoughts either in the chat or by raising your hand if you choose to. In a change from our first session, you're not required to raise your hand. You'll be able to unmute yourselves if you would prefer just to speak to us once we get into the discussion section. You should be aware that the session today is being recorded and will be publicly available. The chat log will also be captured at the end of the session, but will only be for the use of the working group. It will not be shared publicly. Live transcripts and captions are available for those who would like them. And hashtags for Twitter and the HathiTrust Slack channel are on the slide, and we encourage you to continue the conversation there. Next slide, please. So if you were at the member meeting last week, some of this will be familiar, and I apologize in advance for that. For those who weren't with us last week, some quick background about the working group. The Digital Collection Strategy Working Group is a newly created group, and we're just in our first year of activity. We have a strong roster of members, which you can see here on the slide, drawn from across the HathiTrust membership in both the US and in Canada, and from the HathiTrust staff. The working group members bring expertise in collections, special collections and archives, digitization and digital collections, and scholarly communications, as well as a wide range of institutional perspectives into the working group's discussions. The link to our charge is also on the slide and will be added to the chat. I won't spend too much time talking about the charge, but wanted just to mention a couple of points briefly. First, the charge for the Digital Collection Strategy Working Group builds on the good work done by the previous Collections Committee, which was one of HathiTrust's long-running standing committees. That committee was closed at the time our working group was established, but we appreciate all of the work that they did over the years, and we've brought some of that into our discussions within the working group. Second, the charge for the new working group focuses on building and diversifying the HathiTrust Digital Library through targeted collection development. We've been asked by the Program Steering Committee to explore possibilities and the priorities of HathiTrust members for collection building and for strengthening diversity in the collection, and to identify potential pilot projects that could be approached collaboratively by the HathiTrust members. Next slide, please. Our charge also asks us to engage with the HathiTrust membership around Hattie's digital collection, and it's in that spirit that we're here with you today. The working group has had some very good discussions over the past few months. We've talked with members of the HathiTrust staff and explored possible areas for targeted collaborative collection building. We're happy to share some of our ideas with you, but we really want this to be a time to hear from you as HathiTrust members. We want to hear your thoughts and ideas to help inform our thinking around potential projects and our planning for more engagement with the HathiTrust members in the future. So as I mentioned earlier, with that in mind, we've framed a couple of discussion questions that we hope will spark a good conversation this afternoon. 2 of my working group colleagues, Catherine and Fred, have agreed to lead the discussion today, and at this point, I'd like to hand it off to them.
All right, thanks, Wade. So as Wade mentioned, this is a discussion. It's Community Week, so we're going to have a community discussion, which is pretty exciting. And how this will work is a little bit different from like the traditional, show a slide and talk. We're going to go straight into the discussion. And the first questions that we're going to ask before I put it up there, we want to hear from you about how your library is and your organization or your institute is thinking about with respect to strengthening diversity in your own collection and how that ties into HathiTrust's desire to strengthen diversity in its collection. So I'm going to put some questions up here, and we'd like to get started with these. They're kind of interrelated. The first question we want to ask: what is your organization doing with regard to collection development to address underrepresentation? And how does your strategy in your organization, how does that overlap with your organization's digitization strategy? And what do you think HathiTrust can or should do to address this underrepresentation in the digital library? Now, as Wade mentioned, you can feel free to unmute yourself and start contributing to the discussion, or we can put some things in chat. So I want to leave it open to the community for some initial thoughts. And it's all right if you don't have an answer to all three, but maybe you're thinking of one, or maybe you've thought about another, or maybe you've considered how they might interrelate. And I'm not seeing anything coming in on the chat. So yes, thanks, Heather. Thanks for the reminder to unmute. Perhaps all three questions at once was a little much. So maybe let's just start with the first one. What is your organization, your library, your institute? What are they doing with regard to collection development to address underrepresentation? Okay, we've got some things coming in. Anna says to respond to the first bullet point. Subject librarians, especially in music, art, humanities at Tufts, looking at smaller publishers. Yes, they publish scholarship works by BIPOC. I should mention that we did say at the beginning that we're not publishing the chat logs, but I think the recordings are available. So if your comments are part of the discussion, your chat comment may be in the recording. At our library, Edith says, at our library, we've made a commitment to keep buying from vendors where we collect in global studies, recognizing that many of those things are not available digitally. Okay, that's great. And those are typically items that you would find representing either an authorship or content from an underrepresented population, I'm assuming there. And Teresa Walker, hi Teresa. I'm thinking about how they interrelate. But at the University of Tennessee, we are developing a diversity action plan. And I think that that's happening at a lot of institutes and a lot of libraries. We are developing a diversity action plan and a values-based collection development strategy. Heavily figures in. We also have goals for digital initiatives, and now I'm thinking we could meaningfully articulate the connection in our plan. That's a great point. That is happening a lot. It's a good thing that diversity initiatives are starting up, and to get those library diversity initiatives in conversations with the collection development folks, teams at your particular institution. It's a great way to do that. Great comment. Thanks, Teresa, and nice to see you. We go way back.
It's nice to see you too. Thank you.
I guess one thing that,
Mhm.
in terms of the collection development, it still has to reflect the realities of what's going on in campus. Unless there's a change in curriculum, then there's no incentive to change the collection development policies, or even the distribution of funds for disciplines, because those are usually historical. I'm hoping to slowly change that where I am at Baylor. But luckily, the Common Core in many of the disciplines have now taken on completely rework them so that they have to provide multiple cultural experiences in literature and political science and history. And because of that, then it's easier to look at building a more diverse collection, because you're building the collection to support the research and teaching needs of your institution.
That's a great point. It's all tied together. It has the initiatives to promote diversity and promote those underrepresented voices has to be institute wide, because those connections are there and everything is related in sort of a web. And yes, Miranda, yeah, I agree. Great to hear people talk about the sources of library materials, because that can make a difference if that source focuses on a particular voice. We got a couple more minutes for this slide before we go on to the next discussion topic, but I want to focus on that third question. Do any of you on this call have any thoughts about what HathiTrust can or should do to address this underrepresentation in the digital library? And as we're talking about, these things are connected, like it kind of depends on what is in our members' collections. But maybe some of you have given thought to what HathiTrust needs to do to expand and promote those underrepresented voices.
I guess I'm wondering, how do we get those collections that may be outside of the membership of HathiTrust? I was in Chicago for 21 years, and I think of the Chicago Public Library, and I forget the name of it, for the Cultural Center for African American Materials. It's a branch of the Chicago Public Library. That's an amazing source that could be digitized, but it's outside of really the sort of membership tradition of HathiTrust. It would probably end up falling more into if there is any digitization, going into the Digital Public Library of America.
That's a great point, Jeffrey. And I have to say that it's one that's come up in our own working group discussions as well. So it's nice to hear that coming from community members on this meeting as well. And Renata's point in the chat, perhaps work with historians to ID public domain content that supports the study of underrepresented voices and create featured collections to call out these materials. Great. Yeah. And creating resources such as lesson plans like DPLA, which could highlight items in the collection from underrepresented groups. That's a great idea. I'm glad that we've captured that. I know that this is a very short half-hour session, and we've got another discussion prompt that Catherine's going to lead. So keep putting questions in the chat, and Catherine, I'll advance it on to the next discussion prompt for you.
Great. Thanks so much for all the participation so far. And please feel free to continue to riff on and think about the first questions as we move on to the second question set as well, because we're very curious and interested in what's happening at your libraries in terms of how you're planning or how you're actually implementing policies and new approaches to diversifying your collections and how that matches up with digitization and HathiTrust. We're also interested in what barriers might be in your way in terms of contributing to the HathiTrust Digital Library. So if I may, I'm going to maybe emphasize the second question a little bit more so than the first. So what are the barriers and what role do you think that these barriers have played or are playing in addressing representation in the HathiTrust corpus and the HathiTrust Digital Library? So maybe let's start there and see what thoughts folks might have. And are there barriers or challenges, that your institution is confronting and contributing to HathiTrust? So I'm seeing in the chat staffing and capacity during COVID. Absolutely. I'm sure you are not alone in that. Are there particular workflows or other challenges that you might be confronting or working through, whether you've contributed already or whether you're thinking about contributing to the digital library?
I'll speak up a little here. This is Teresa again. One of the things we're thinking a lot about is how we tie our open access or collection development, a lot of different pieces of the values of our mission with our land grant mission at the university. And we are currently working with some of the people from Extension and our agriculture research stations to really convince them about why it's important that we have copyright clearance, or they're okay, at least in some cases, to make these things available in HathiTrust. And we've done a lot of the work already, and sometimes it's very easy to convince people this is the right thing to do and this is what it can do for us. But I think especially when we're thinking about publications coming out of the research experiment stations, I think we need better strategies for how we would characterize the benefits there. That's one thing I'm running into.
And characterizing the benefits of access, of extending access?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Just connecting with what it is they're valuing and thinking about there, I think has been a bit of a barrier. Although I'm not sure probably I need to do the work on that, but that is something we struggle with.
Yeah, other thoughts on access as a potential barrier or hurdle to be working through? In terms of addressing representation or improving the diversity and representation of marginalized voices or underrepresented voices in the HathiTrust Digital Library, an observation was made in the earlier session, because this is the second of 2 sessions that we've hosted on this topic. An observation was made that it's entirely possible that the work that's been authored by folks who have typically been included in marginalized or underrepresented groups, may have been published within the more recent past, and as such, may not be within the public domain. And so that's certainly an access consideration or an access barrier for us to be thinking through in terms of, how we build this collection and also how we then make it available. We build up, these areas of the collection. Any other thoughts on access as a potential challenge? I wonder if we might return to some of the ideas that were coming up in the first set of questions. Thinking about this notion of values-driven collection development, how that is something that's being embraced. To what extent is that being embraced within your institution? That was a really great turn of phrase and way to be thinking about collection development that came up earlier in the chat, and how that might match up with teaching and learning needs and your key stakeholders that you're building your collections for. I'm curious if folks have any more thoughts on shifts or changes in how you're approaching collection development, especially with regards to increasing diversity within your own collections. Oh, and we do have a question that came up in the chat for Teresa about the extension and ag research. Heather Christensen is asking, were you referring to the deposit of digital publications by your institution or awareness of the HathiTrust collection and what we have that is useful? Or is it inclusion of those units for member access as part of your institution? Yeah, that's a great, couple great points of clarification, Teresa. Are you able to share a little bit more about that?
Yes, it's part of the deposit of our own collections, and it's something we've done. It's something we've done work on, and yet I think with the extension publications in particular, we're not really running into any problems there. We know we want those to be widely accessible, and we know that access to those is very important across Tennessee. And so that's something we're doing. It's the piece that is a harder sell is the more research-based publications coming out of the ag research stations. But yes, it's really our own collection, and it's not necessarily that we have chosen in putting these collections out there. It's not really so much about representing diversity or highlighting more diverse collections, so much as it's thinking about social justice as an access as a social justice issue.
That's a really good point. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's one for us all to carry out of this session, is thinking about access as a social justice issue. Absolutely. Another question and comment in the chat from Roxanne Pickens. Does staffing and capacity also affect the ability to pursue and implement values-driven collection development? This work may represent a significant shift within institutions and may take more time. Yeah. For those who have been working towards, whether you're calling it specifically this or not, values-driven collection development, how are you making space for this in a time of potentially decreased capacity. And certainly in an ideal world, thinking about folding in your digitization strategy into that kind of values-driven collection development, thinking about the digital collection development side of things. Well, if I may, I have kind of a back pocket question that the working group was bouncing around that didn't make the final cut here, but I think is very much related to some of the things that we've been talking about. I'm going to pause on that for just a moment because we do have another chat comment that I want to make sure to share out from Teresa, that they're in the very beginning stages, but are making this a priority across the libraries, involving all units in meetings. That sounds like a really great strategy. So one thing, I don't know that we have too much time for discussion on this, but certainly, the working group would value more input on these topics, and for the conversation to continue through chat or reaching out to us directly. To the extent that you understand representation in the current digital library and where there are gaps, those are the kinds of things that we're very interested in getting a much better handle on. So insights that folks have in that regard, I think would be very, very welcome, not within the next 2 minutes necessarily, but as food for thought and an area of future discussion. So I'm going to turn it back to Wade, who's going to close us out. Thanks so much for participating.
Great. Thanks, Catherine, and thanks to all of you for that active discussion. I think Fred and Catherine did a tremendous job of facilitating our conversation today, so a big thank you to them. Just in closing, a few next steps. The working group will be reviewing the notes and the chat logs from today's session to help inform the next stages of our work as we begin framing out some possible areas for collection building in a little bit more detail. We'll also be planning some additional ways to connect with you as HathiTrust members and working with the HathiTrust staff and the other working groups and task forces to coordinate and share out those opportunities with the members. So keep an eye out. There will be some additional opportunities in the future to talk with us. If you'd like to share any comments directly with the working group, or if you would be willing to be contacted as part of the working group's outreach activities, please feel free to contact me and I will be happy to share that with the rest of the working group. My contact details are on the next slide. You can go ahead, Fred. So just in closing, thank you all again for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we'll look forward to talking with you again in the future. Take care.
Okay, good to stop sharing now.
Yes.
Okay.